All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into the human nervous system.
Yeah, it's incredible, this network that basically makes us who we are.
It really is mind-blowing when you think about it. This network of cells controlling everything we do.
It's like the simplest reflex to like the most complex thoughts or emotions or whatever. It's
The-
amazing.
It's like having a biological supercomputer, right,
Mhm.
inside of us, just constantly taking in all this information, processing it, sending out commands.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we're going to try to decode all of that today. We're going to explore how a neuron works. We're going to look at the different parts of the brain. We're even going to try to tackle some of those weirder sounding terms,
Right.
like arbor vitae, the stuff that makes you sound really smart at parties.
Exactly, exactly.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics, the building blocks of this whole system, the neurons.
Right, right. Yeah, so the neuron, it's like the tiny messenger that makes everything possible. And we've actually got a diagram of a model neuron here that kind of shows all the key parts, like the cell body, the axon, and the dendrites.
I'm looking at this diagram, and it reminds me of, it kind of reminds me of a tree with branches reaching out.
Yeah.
So how do these different parts work together to send signals throughout the body?
So think of it like a relay race,
Yeah.
The dendrites, the branch-like structures, they're like the first runners, right? They
Yeah.
receive signals from other neurons, and then they pass that signal, that baton, if you will, to the cell body,
Right.
which is like the central hub.
Ah.
And then from there, the axon, which is that long cable-like extension,
Right.
that takes off running, transmits the signal to the next neuron in the line.
Oh, so it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Each neuron passing the signal along this network.
Exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And to speed things up, a lot of axons are actually covered in this fatty substance. It's called the myelin sheath.
Okay.
Think of it as the insulation on a high-speed internet cable. Right.
Make sure that the signal travels quickly. You don't get any lag.
No lag in the brain.
Right. Exactly.
That makes sense. So speaking of the myelin sheath, I see these Schwann cells labeled on the diagram.
Right.
What are they?
So the Schwann cells are actually the master insulators. They wrap around the axon, forming that myelin sheath that we were talking about.
Mhm.
Think of them as like dedicated electricians, making sure those signals are zipping along without any interference.
Okay, so the Schwann cells are kind of like the insulation crew,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
making sure that everything stays strong, that the signal stays strong.
Right.
But what about those gaps in the myelin sheath?
Oh, yeah.
Those have a cool name, right?
Yeah.
The nodes of Ranvier, is that what they are?
The nodes of Ranvier, exactly. Those are like the booster stations along the axon.
Okay.
So instead of traveling continuously, the signal kind of jumps from one node to the next,
Yeah.
which actually, speeds up the transmission even more. It's like taking a high-speed train,
Yeah.
but it just makes a few express stops. Interesting. So even the gaps have a purpose.
Right, exactly. Everything is there for a reason.
Yeah, nature really thought of everything, huh? Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. Zoom out to the big picture.
Okay.
The command center itself.
Oh,
The brain.
the brain, the ultimate control center, right?
Yes.
It's amazing. It's so complex. We're still trying to understand everything about it, but
Yeah.
but it's responsible for everything. Our thoughts, emotions, our movements, our senses, you name it.
Yeah. I've always pictured the brain as this wrinkly walnut,
Right.
but obviously there's a lot more going on than just that. So let's start with the cerebrum. That's the largest part of the brain.
Yeah.
And our sources mention that it's divided into the left and right hemispheres,
Right.
separated by what they call the longitudinal fissure. What is that, like a giant crack down the middle?
Yeah, essentially. It's a deep groove that separates the two hemispheres, but they're not completely separate.
No.
They're connected by this thick band of nerve fibers. It's called the corpus callosum, which we'll talk about later.
So it's like two halves of a whole, but they work together.
Right.
But they also have their own specialties.
Right.
I've always heard people say like, oh, I'm right-brained or I'm left-brained, like it determines your personality or something.
Yeah, it's a popular idea, and there is some truth to it. While both hemispheres work together, certain functions tend to be dominated by one side or the other. For example, language processing. For most people, that's largely handled by the left side, while, creativity, spatial awareness, that's more often associated with the right side.
That's really interesting. It's like having too many brains working together.
Exactly.
But okay, so looking at this diagram of the cerebrum, it's like so wrinkly. It's so folded. And they even have cool names for the folds.
Yeah,
Gyri for the ridges and sulci for the valleys.
right.
But why all the wrinkling?
So those wrinkles are actually a really brilliant design feature. The folds, the gyri and the sulci, they actually increase the surface area of the brain.
So you can fit more neurons in there.
Exactly. You can pack more neurons into that limited space, which is our skull.
So more brain power.
Exactly.
It's amazing how nature kind of figured out how to, cram more to a smaller package.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of packing things in, I'm curious about the difference between gray matter and white matter.
Right.
They both sound kind of gray to me.
Right. Well, think of gray matter as like the processing centers of the brain.
Okay.
That's where you find the cell bodies of neurons, the dendrites, the unmyelinated axons, all buzzing with activity.
Yeah.
So, that's where information is processed, decisions are made, memories are formed, all that good stuff.
So gray matter is where the action happens.
Yeah, like the bustling city center.
Okay.
And white matter is more like, the network of highways connecting those city centers.
Right.
It's made up of myelinated axons, those insulated cables that we talked about.
Right.
And that allows for, rapid communication between different parts of the brain.
So gray matter processes and white matter connects.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So let's zoom in a little bit more on these lobes
Okay.
that I always hear about. We've got the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe.
Right.
Do they each have their own kind of special job?
They absolutely do. Each lobe has its own unique set of responsibilities.
Okay.
And all of that contributes to like this overall symphony of brain activity.
Wow, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So let's start with the frontal lobe.
Okay.
It's like right at the front of the brain, so I'm guessing it's pretty important.
Right, it is. It's often called the executive of the brain. It's involved in higher level thinking, planning, decision making. Personality is kind of housed there.
Okay.
It's what helps us, set goals, control impulses, navigate all those complex social situations we find ourselves in.
So if someone's personality changes drastically, it could be from damage to the frontal lobe.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. Although brain injuries are complex, there's a lot of factors involved. But the frontal lobe does play a crucial role in shaping who we are and, how we behave. It's also responsible for motor speech, so our ability to form words and speak.
So that's a lot of responsibility for one lobe. What about the parietal lobe? It's like right behind the frontal lobe, according to this diagram.
The parietal lobe is all about processing sensory information from the body. So think, touch, pressure, pain, temperature, even spatial awareness.
Okay.
It helps us understand where our body is in space and how we interact with, everything around us.
So when I feel like the softness of a blanket or like the warmth of a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
that's my parietal lobe.
Yeah, exactly. It's constantly receiving input from our senses and helping us interpret those sensations.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay, moving towards the back of the brain, we have the occipital lobe. I'm
Right.
guessing this one's all about vision.
You got it. It's the visual processing center. Receives input from the eyes, and then it transforms those signals into the images that we see, right? It allows us to recognize objects, faces, scenes.
Wow, I can't even imagine what life would be like without vision.
Right.
So important.
Yeah.
And last but not least, we have the temporal lobe. Kind of
Yes.
tucked underneath the others. What's its specialty?
So the temporal lobe is a fascinating one. It's involved in memory, language comprehension, and even emotional responses. It helps us recognize familiar faces, understand spoken language, and process sounds, including music.
So when I hear a familiar song and I get hit with a wave of nostalgia, that's my temporal lobe connecting music to memories.
Exactly, yeah. Powerful example of how the brain, integrates different sensory experiences and emotions.
That's incredible. Each lobe has its own unique role to play,
Yeah.
and somehow they all just work together seamlessly. Speaking of connections, I see this structure labeled corpus callosum,
Right.
and it seems to be linking the two hemispheres.
Right, it is. It's like the superhighway of communication between the two hemispheres.
Hmm?
It's a thick band of nerve fibers, contains a staggering 200 million axons,
Wow.
and it allows the two sides of the brain to share information and work together.
200 million axons.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that is, I can't even imagine what would happen if this connection was like disrupted.
Right.
Like what would happen to the brain?
Yeah, well, there have been some fascinating studies on what they call split brain patients. This is where the corpus callosum has been, surgically severed to treat severe epilepsy. And those cases have revealed some pretty remarkable insights into the specialized functions of each hemisphere and how they interact.
Wow, that sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to look into that. But for now, let's move on to some other structures that I see labeled here.
Okay.
There's the cingulate gyrus. That's kind of mysterious.
Yeah.
What is that?
The cingulate gyrus is a curved fold that sits on top of the corpus callosum, and it's involved in processing emotions, regulating behavior, even helping us control our impulses.
So when I resist the urge to eat that extra slice of cake,
Yeah, it could be it.
that's my cingulate gyrus.
Yeah. Yeah, it plays a role in our ability to, weigh consequences and make decisions based on both logic and emotion.
Wow, interesting. And while we're talking about these different structures, we can't forget the ventricles.
Right.
What do they do?
So the ventricles are, they're fluid-filled cavities within the brain,
Okay.
and they're really crucial for cushioning the brain, protecting it from impacts.
Oh, so it's like a built-in shock absorber.
Yeah, exactly. They also circulate cerebrospinal fluid, which is a clear liquid that nourishes the brain, removes waste products, and helps to maintain a stable environment for those brain cells.
So it's like a cleaning system and a shock absorber.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty amazing. Okay, so let's venture into a region called the diencephalon. Sounds kind of like a hidden kingdom within the brain.
Right, it is. It's tucked away beneath the cerebrum, and it contains a lot of really important structures,
Right.
including the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland.
That's a lot of names. Can we break those down one by one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start with the thalamus.
Yeah.
What's its role in this hidden kingdom?
So the thalamus acts as the grand central station of the brain. Almost all sensory information from the body, except for smell, passes through the thalamus
Wow.
before it's sent to, the appropriate areas of the cerebral cortex for processing.
Okay, so if the thalamus is like Grand Central Station, does that mean that it filters information too?
That's a great question. It doesn't just relay information, it also filters and prioritizes it.
Yeah.
So making sure that the most relevant sensory input reaches our conscious awareness.
So that's kind of like a gatekeeper,
Exactly.
like deciding which messages are important enough to, reach the boss.
Right.
Wow. So what about the hypothalamus? I've heard it's involved in some pretty essential functions.
Yeah. The hypothalamus is tiny, but it's really a powerhouse.
Okay.
It's responsible for maintaining the body's internal balance, what we call homeostasis. So, temperature regulation, hunger, thirst, sleep-wake cycles, even the stress response.
So it's like the body's internal thermostat, making sure everything's running smoothly.
Exactly, exactly. It also works closely with the pituitary gland, often called the master gland, because it controls the release of hormones from other glands throughout the body. And then the infundibulum, which acts as a stalk connecting the two, kind of facilitates communication between them.
This is getting really intricate. And there's one more gland in this region, the pineal gland.
Right.
What does it do?
So the pineal gland is a tiny gland, and it plays a role in regulating our sleep-wake cycles,
Okay.
what we call our circadian rhythm. And it produces melatonin.
Oh, melatonin.
Yeah, which is a hormone that helps us, feel sleepy at night.
Yeah. I've heard of that. People take it to help with like jet lag and stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the pineal gland and its production of melatonin are really crucial for synchronizing our internal clock with the natural light-dark cycles of the environment.
That makes sense. It sounds like the diencephalon is a busy place, controlling so many vital functions.
Yes.
Let's move on to a structure that always kind of catches my eye because of its unique shape, the cerebellum.
Right.
It looks like a miniature brain tucked under the cerebrum.
It does. It does. The cerebellum, with its intricate folds and branches, is a marvel of, neural architecture.
Okay.
When you look at it in cross-section, it has this very distinctive tree-like appearance, which is why it's called the arbor vitae, which is Latin for tree of life.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah.
Like a mini brain within the brain.
Right.
So what does this tree of life actually do?
The cerebellum is our balance and coordination center.
Oh, okay.
It receives input from our senses, from the spinal cord, from other parts of the brain, and it uses this information to kind of fine-tune our movements, making sure they're smooth, coordinated.
So when I'm dancing or playing sports or even just walking without tripping over my own 2 feet, that's the cerebellum at work.
Exactly. Yeah, it's constantly making adjustments to make sure that we, maintain our balance and move gracefully through the world.
It's amazing how much is going on that we don't even realize.
It is. It is.
Now, what about this vermis structure I see labeled on the diagram?
Right.
Sounds like something you'd find in a garden.
Yeah. The vermis is a narrow, worm-like structure that connects the two hemispheres of the cerebellum. And it plays a a crucial role in coordinating movements of the trunk and limbs. So, making sure both sides of the body are working together harmoniously.
So it's like a central coordinator making sure everything's in sync.
Precisely, yeah. It receives input from both sides of the cerebellum, helps integrate that information, and that creates smooth, coordinated movements.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in the brain already, but there's one more crucial area that we need to explore, and that's the brainstem. It sounds kind of ominous, like it's the stem holding the whole brain up.
Yeah, you could say that. So it's this stalk-like structure that connects the brain to the spinal cord, and it's responsible for a lot of those vital functions. So breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, even sleep and wakefulness.
Wow, so it's like the life support system for the brain.
Exactly.
No wonder it sounds kind of ominous.
Yeah. It controls so many essential functions that we don't even think about, right? It's what's keeping us alive and functioning. And damage to the brainstem can be, life-threatening because of its critical role.
That makes sense. It's like the control center for like our most basic primal functions.
Yeah.
I see it's divided into three parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata.
Right.
Do they each have their own kind of specific jobs?
They do. They do. So the midbrain, as its name suggests, is located in the middle of the brainstem. It's involved in eye movements, visual and auditory processing, and also motor control.
So when I like turn my head to look at something or
Yeah.
track a moving object, that's my midbrain.
Yeah, precisely. It helps us kind of orient ourselves to visual and auditory stimuli in our environment.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then the pons, which is located below the midbrain, acts as a relay center, transmitting information between the cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the spinal cord.
Okay.
And it also plays a role in controlling sleep, breathing, and facial expression.
So it's kind of like a communication hub,
Yeah.
keeping everything connected.
Exactly. Exactly. And lastly, we have the medulla oblongata, which connects directly to the spinal cord. And it controls those vital autonomic functions like heart rate, blood pressure, breathing.
Okay.
Also responsible for some reflexes like swallowing, coughing, sneezing.
So much packed into this tiny part of the brain.
Yeah.
Incredible. And before we move on from the brainstem, there are two more structures that I'd love to hear about: the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. What are those?
Right. So those are fascinating structures located in the midbrain. The superior colliculi are involved in visual reflexes, so they help us quickly orient our gaze towards sudden movements or changes in our visual field.
So when I see something moving out of the corner of my eye and instinctively turn my head to look,
Exactly.
that's the superior colliculi.
That is it. They help us react quickly to, potential threats or points of interest. And the inferior colliculi, located just below, play a similar role, but for auditory stimuli. So they process sounds and help us, locate where those sounds are coming from.
So if I hear a loud noise and instinctively turn my head to see what it is.
Exactly. They help us orient ourselves to, important sounds in our environment.
Wow. This is incredible. We've explored so much already, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this amazing system.
Right. There's still so much more to explore. We've covered a lot of ground in the brain, but our journey through the nervous system isn't over yet.
Well, I can't wait to keep going.
We'll come back to our deep dive into the nervous system. So last time we took kind of a whirlwind tour of the brain, the incredible command center up in our skull.
It's really amazing how much is packed into that wrinkly walnut.
Yeah, it's truly mind-boggling. But our journey's not over yet. We still got to explore the spinal cord and all those nerves that extend out through the body.
All right, I'm ready for more.
Yeah.
Especially since we kind of left off talking about the brainstem, which sounded pretty crucial to the whole system.
Oh, yeah. It really is. It connects the brain to the spinal cord, which is our next stop. Think of the spinal cord as like the information superhighway.
Okay.
This vital pathway, for signals going back and forth between the brain and the rest of the body.
So I'm picturing this like information superhighway,
Yeah.
bustling with activity. What kind of information is like zipping up and down this highway?
So it's a two-way flow of information. So sensory information, right? From the body, travels up the spinal cord to the brain, and then motor commands from the brain travel down the spinal cord to the muscles, which controls our movements.
So when I touch something hot and I instinctively pull my hand away, that's like sensory information going up to the brain,
Yeah.
and then a motor command coming back down.
Exactly, exactly. And it all happens so fast thanks to the, remarkable efficiency of the spinal cord. And just like the brain, the spinal cord is also a complex structure with its own organization.
Well, I'm looking at this diagram of the spinal cord, and it does look pretty complicated. We've got gray matter, white matter, dorsal horns, ventral horns.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a complex structure, but let's kind of break it down a little bit.
Okay.
So remember how we talked about gray matter and white matter in the brain?
Right. Gray matter is where the processing happens.
Yeah.
And white matter is for transmitting signals, like those insulated cables we talked about.
Exactly. So in the spinal cord, the gray matter is actually located in the center, and it forms kind of a butterfly or H-shaped structure.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah. And this is where sensory information is received, it's processed, and also where motor neurons send out those commands to the muscles.
And I see like labels for dorsal horns and ventral horns.
Yes.
Are those part of the gray matter?
They are. So the dorsal horns, which are those points on the butterfly that kind of face towards the back of the body, they receive sensory information from the body, so touch, pain, temperature, all those sensations that we experience.
So when I touch something hot, and that sensory information is traveling through the dorsal horns to my brain, which then says, hey, that's hot, move your hand.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And then the ventral horns, which face kind of towards the front, contain those motor neurons that send signals to the muscles, which control our movements.
Right.
So when your brain tells your hand to move away from the heat, that command is traveling through the ventral horns.
Fascinating. It's like this perfectly choreographed dance between sensory input and motor output.
Yeah. It really is.
So what about this central canal that I see running right down the center?
Right. So the central canal is a small fluid-filled channel that runs the entire length of the spinal cord.
Okay.
It's actually continuous with the ventricles in the brain, and it contains cerebrospinal fluid. Remember that clear liquid that we talked about earlier? So it cushions and nourishes the brain and the spinal cord.
Ah, so it's like an extension of the brain's like cleaning and protection system.
Exactly. Exactly. And the cerebrospinal fluid that's circulating through there helps to remove those waste products from the spinal cord and provides that protective cushion.
Incredible. It's
Yeah.
like our bodies have their own like internal plumbing system. Okay, so we've got the gray matter with its dorsal and ventral horns for processing and sending commands, the central canal for cleaning and protection.
Yeah.
What about the white matter that surrounds the gray matter?
Right. So the white matter is made up of those myelinated axons,
Okay.
those insulated cables, right?
Right.
That can transmit signals efficiently. Remember how we talked about the myelin sheath acting like insulation on an electrical wire? Well, it's the same principle here.
Right, it helps the signals travel quickly without losing strength.
Exactly. And these myelinated axons are actually organized into what we call tracks or bundles of fibers that carry information up and down the spinal cord. So some tracks carry sensory information from the body up to the brain, while others carry those motor commands from the brain down to the muscles. It's a constant two-way flow of information, keeping us aware of our surroundings and enabling us to, move and interact.
Just like a superhighway with multiple lanes, each carrying a different type of information.
Perfect analogy.
Some lanes headed north to the brain and others south to the body. Amazing.
It really is. Now, this intricate structure, this information superhighway, it's pretty delicate, right? It needs protection. And that's where the meninges come in.
Meninges. I've heard that term before, but I'm not really sure what it refers to.
So the meninges are 3 protective layers that surround the brain and spinal cord.
Okay.
Think of them as like a triple layered shield, safeguarding these vital structures.
Okay, so it's like the spinal cord has its own like personal security detail.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
What are the names of these protective layers?
So from the outermost layer to the innermost layer, we have the dura mater,
Go on.
the arachnoid mater,
Okay.
and the pia mater.
Dura mater, arachnoid mater, P mater. Those names sound like they're straight out of a Latin textbook.
They do.
But it makes sense that something so important would have like these impressive names.
Right. They do have a certain ring to them.
So dura mater is the tough, like outermost layer, providing like a strong protective barrier.
Right.
Arachnoid mater is this delicate web-like layer underneath.
Yeah.
And pia mater is the innermost layer, clinging closely to the surface.
Exactly. So it's like a triple layer of protection. Tough on the outside, delicate on the inside.
But what about the space between these layers? Is it just like empty space?
Not quite. So between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, there's a space called the subarachnoid space,
Okay.
and that's filled with, you guessed it, cerebrospinal fluid.
Ah, so more cushioning, more protection?
Exactly. So it's like the spinal cord is floating in this protective bath of cerebrospinal fluid.
Wow, that's a great image. Okay, so you might have heard of these epidural injections. They use those a lot for pain relief during childbirth or surgery.
Right.
I don't really understand how those work, though.
So those injections are administered into what we call the epidural space, which is located outside the dura mater, the outermost layer.
Okay.
So it's a way to deliver medication directly to the area surrounding the spinal cord, and that can effectively block pain signals.
Wow, that's amazing. So by understanding the anatomy, doctors can actually deliver that pain relief exactly where it's needed.
Exactly. Anatomy is so important for understanding how the body works, both in health and disease.
Okay, so we've got this like well-protected spinal cord. It's an
Yeah.
information superhighway.
Yeah.
But how does the information actually get to and from the rest of the body?
Right.
I'm guessing that's where the nerves come in.
Exactly. So the spinal cord is kind of like the main trunk of a tree, and then branches extend outward to reach all parts of the body.
Okay.
And these branches are the spinal nerves, and they carry sensory information from the body to the spinal cord and motor commands from the spinal cord out to the muscles.
So it's like a vast network of roads branching out from the superhighway.
Yeah, exactly. And we have 31 pairs of these spinal nerves,
Okay.
and each one is named for the region of the spinal cord that it emerges from. So we have 8 cervical nerves in the neck region, 12 thoracic nerves in the chest region, 5 lumbar nerves in the lower back, 5 sacral nerves in the pelvic region, and then 1 coccygeal nerve at the very end.
Wow, that's a lot of nerves.
Yeah.
So does each nerve have a specific area of the body that it like controls?
Right. Each spinal nerve innervates or supplies a particular region of the body. So it carries sensory information from that region and controls the muscles in that area. It's like a highly organized system, making sure that every part of the body is connected to the central nervous system.
I can't even imagine how they figured all of that out.
It really is a testament to the complexity and organization of the human body. And to make things even more intricate, these spinal nerves often branch out further to form what we call plexuses.
Plexuses, what are those?
So think of plexuses as like these distribution hubs where nerve fibers from different spinal nerves kind of intermingle
Yeah.
and then branch out to supply very specific areas of the body.
Yeah, okay, so it's like the electrical wiring in a house. You have like the main power lines coming in,
Right.
and then they branch out to different rooms, powering all the lights and appliances and everything else.
That's a great analogy. So we have several major plexuses in the body. Let's start with the cervical plexus, which is located in the neck.
Okay.
And that supplies nerves to the head, the neck, and the shoulders.
So when I turn my head, shrug my shoulders, or I feel the breeze on my neck, that's the cervical plexus.
Exactly. It's involved in controlling those movements and receiving sensory input from those areas.
Okay, cool. What about the brachial plexus?
Yeah.
Where's that located and what does that control?
So the brachial plexus is a really complex network of nerves that supplies the arms and the hands.
The brachial plexus. That name sounds familiar. Isn't that related to carpal tunnel syndrome?
You're right. Carpal tunnel syndrome is a condition that affects the median nerve, which is actually part of the brachial plexus, and it occurs when the median nerve, which runs through this narrow passageway in the wrist called the carpal tunnel, becomes compressed. And that can cause pain, numbness, and tingling in the hand and fingers.
Ah, so carpal tunnel syndrome is like a nerve issue related to the brachial plexus.
Exactly. And the brachial plexus is responsible for controlling a wide range of movements in the arms and hands, from delicate finger movements to powerful grasping motions. It's essential for everything, from writing and playing instruments to, lifting weights and playing sports.
It's amazing how much we rely on it for like everyday tasks.
Right. And then moving down, we have the lumbar plexus, which is located in the lower back. And that supplies nerves to the abdomen, the lower back, and the legs. So it's involved in controlling movements of the legs and receiving sensory input from those areas.
So when I walk, run, or even feel a prick on my leg, that's the lumbar plexus.
Precisely. And lastly, we have the sacral plexus, which is located in the pelvis. That supplies nerves to the buttocks, genitals, and legs.
Okay, so the sacral plexus involved in controlling the legs, but also responsible for some other more sensitive areas.
That's right. It plays a role in, bowel and bladder function as well as sexual function. And one of the most well-known nerves in the sacral plexus is the sciatic nerve, which is the longest and thickest nerve in the body.
The sciatic nerve, yeah. I've definitely heard of that one.
Mm.
Isn't that the nerve that causes sciatica?
Exactly.
That painful condition that shoots down the leg?
It is. Sciatica occurs when the sciatic nerve, which runs from the lower back down the back of each leg, becomes irritated or compressed.
Yeah.
And that can cause, pain, numbness, tingling that can radiate all the way down the leg.
Wow. So sciatica is another example of a nerve issue related to a specific plexus.
It is. And these plexuses, with their intricate networks of nerves, really highlight just how interconnected the nervous system is.
Right.
Every part of our body is linked back to the brain and the spinal cord through this, intricate web of nerves.
Like our bodies have their own, elaborate communication network.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up our exploration of the peripheral nervous system, there's one more fascinating structure I'd love to hear about.
Okay.
The sympathetic chain ganglia.
Ah, yes. The
Yeah.
sympathetic chain ganglia. Those are part of the autonomic nervous system, which controls those involuntary functions.
Wow.
So heart rate, breathing, digestion, it operates largely outside of our conscious control, keeps our body running smoothly.
So it's like the autopilot of the body.
Exactly. And within the autonomic nervous system, we have two main branches.
Okay.
The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
And they work together to, maintain balance and respond to different situations.
Okay, tell me more about these two branches. What's the difference between them?
So think of them as having kind of opposite roles.
Okay.
So the sympathetic nervous system, that's responsible for what we call the fight or flight response,
Okay.
which is our body's reaction to stress or danger.
Fight or flight, that sounds familiar. It's like when I get a sudden adrenaline rush if I'm, startled or feel threatened.
Exactly. So when we perceive a threat, the sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear.
Right.
And it triggers a whole cascade of physiological changes to prepare us for action.
So what kind of changes are we talking about? What happens in the body during this fight or flight response?
So your heart rate and your breathing, those speed up to deliver more oxygen to your muscles, preparing you to fight or flee. Blood vessels constrict in non-essential areas, like your digestive system, so that diverts blood flow to your muscles and your brain where you need it the most. Your pupils dilate to let more light into your eyes, enhancing your vision. You might even start to sweat to regulate your body temperature.
Wow. That's quite a response.
Right. And the sympathetic chain ganglia, they play a key role in coordinating this response.
Okay.
So they're a chain of ganglia, or clusters of nerve cell bodies that run along either side of the spinal cord. And these ganglia receive signals from the brain,
Okay.
and they relay them to various organs and tissues throughout the body, triggering all those fight or flight changes.
It's like a rapid communication system,
Yep.
alerting the body to danger and mobilizing all those resources.
Oh, great.
Incredible.
It's a remarkable adaptation, and it's really helped us survive, challenging environments throughout our evolutionary history.
Right.
It's what allows us to react so quickly in those dangerous situations.
That makes sense. But what about the other branch of the autonomic nervous system,
Right.
the parasympathetic nervous system?
Yes.
So if the sympathetic nervous system is all about fight or flight, what's the parasympathetic system doing?
So the parasympathetic nervous system is all about rest and digest.
Okay.
It promotes relaxation, it slows down the heart rate, it lowers blood pressure, it stimulates digestion, it helps us conserve energy and replenish our resources.
So it's like the opposite of the fight or flight response. It helps us calm down.
Exactly. It brings our body back into balance after the sympathetic nervous system has kind of done its job.
This is fascinating. It's amazing to think about all of these complex processes happening in our bodies, every second, and we don't even realize it.
It truly is a marvel of, biological engineering, and
Yeah.
we've really only just begun to explore the intricacies of this remarkable system.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the nervous system. We've journeyed through the brain, explored the spinal cord, and untangled that network of nerves that branch out throughout the body.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We've seen how all these different parts work together to control our movements, process sensory information, regulate all those essential functions, often without us even realizing it.
It really makes you appreciate just how complex the human body really is.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, there's one more fascinating group of nerves that I'd love to hear more about. The cranial nerves.
Right.
And I know that they're kind of special because they emerge directly from the brain rather than the spinal cord.
That's right. They're like the direct lines of communication between the brain and, the head, face, and neck. And we have 12 pairs of them,
12 pairs. Okay.
each with its own name and function.
That sounds like a lot to keep track of, but I'm ready for the challenge.
Okay.
Where should we start?
Let's start with a sense that's often considered the most evocative and emotionally powerful, shall we? Smell. Cranial nerve number 1, the olfactory nerve, is responsible for our sense of smell.
Oh, smell. I'm already intrigued.
Yeah.
So like when I walk into a bakery and get hit with that aroma of freshly baked bread,
Yeah.
that's my olfactory nerve sending signals to my brain.
Exactly. The olfactory nerve transmits those sensory signals from the receptors up in our nasal cavity up to the olfactory bulb in the brain, which then processes those signals and interprets them as specific smells.
It's amazing how a simple scent can like trigger such vivid memories and emotions. Like the smell of freshly cut grass always takes me back to my childhood summers.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how smell is deeply connected to our memory and emotional centers. It's a good reminder that the nervous system, it's also about shaping our experiences and who we are.
That's so true. Okay, so on to the next cranial nerve adventure. What's next?
Let's move on to cranial nerve number 2, the optic nerve, responsible for our sense of sight. So this nerve transmits visual information from the retina, which is the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye,
Okay.
to the visual processing centers in the brain.
Vision, arguably the most dominant of our senses.
It is.
I can't even imagine navigating the world without it.
Yeah, it's a remarkable sense that allows us to, perceive light, color, shapes, movement, all that. And it's made possible by the intricate connection between the eyes and the brain, facilitated by the optic nerve.
I remember from our brain discussion that there's a point where the optic nerves from each eye partially cross, right?
Yeah.
It's called the optic chiasm.
You have a great memory. The optic chiasm is this crucial structure where nerve fibers from the nasal side of each retina cross over to the opposite side of the brain.
Okay.
And this crossing allows information from both eyes to be combined and processed. And that's how we get depth perception in that unified visual field.
So it's like the brain is like weaving together the information from both eyes
Exactly.
to create this seamless visual experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real testament to the brain's processing power and, that integration that's happening.
Okay, so what other sensory wonders do these cranial nerves have in store for us?
Well, let's move on to cranial nerve number 5, the trigeminal nerve.
Okay.
This one's kind of an overachiever. It has both sensory and motor functions.
Oh, wow.
So it's responsible for sensations in the face, touch, pain, temperature, and it also controls the muscles involved in chewing.
So when I like feel a gentle breeze on my face or bite into a delicious apple,
Yeah.
that's the trigeminal nerve at work.
Exactly. It has 3 branches that cover different areas of the face, making sure we can, sense all these different stimuli and coordinate those complex movements of chewing. It's a crucial nerve for, both experiencing the world and enjoying a good meal.
I never thought about how much actually goes into something as simple as chewing.
It's a really highly coordinated process involving muscles, nerves, sensory feedback. The whole works.
Okay, so we've covered smell, sight, and facial sensations. What's next?
Let's focus on cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve.
Right.
This one's all about expressions. So it controls those muscles that allow us to smile, frown, raise our eyebrows, convey a whole range of emotions.
Oh, the facial nerve.
Yeah,
I wonder if I can make a funny face right now and like actually feel it working.
go for it.
Right.
It's fascinating, isn't it, to become aware of that interplay between our nerves and muscles, even in something as simple as a facial expression.
It really is. Okay, so on to the next cranial nerve adventure. What's next?
Well, now we'll tune into cranial nerve number 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve.
Okay.
And this one's got 2 branches, one for hearing and one for balance.
Ah, the nerve that lets us experience the world of sound and keeps us steady on our feet.
Yeah.
So this is the one that allows us to enjoy music or hear the voices of loved ones and maintain our equilibrium.
Exactly. So the cochlear branch transmits those auditory signals from the inner ear to the brain, allowing us to perceive all those, beautiful sounds you just mentioned. And then the vestibular branch, which is also located in the inner ear, transmits information about head position and movement. And that helps us, maintain our balance and spatial orientation.
I'm really starting to appreciate just how crucial these cranial nerves are for like our everyday experiences. They're kind of like the unsung heroes of our sensory world.
I agree. And we can't wrap up our cranial nerve tour without mentioning one of the most intriguing nerves in the body. Cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve. I've heard that name before, but I don't know a lot about it. What makes it so intriguing?
Well, it's a bit of a wanderer. It has branches that extend from the brainstem all the way down to the abdomen, innervating various organs along the way, including the heart, the lungs, the digestive system, and more.
Wow. So it's like a long-distance traveler connecting the brain to all these vital organs. What exactly does it do?
So the vagus nerve plays a crucial role in regulating many essential functions. So we're talking heart rate, breathing, digestion, even the immune response. It's a key player in the parasympathetic nervous system, which we discussed earlier.
Right, the rest and digest system.
Exactly.
It's like the calming counterpart to that fight or flight system. So when I relax, take a deep breath, and enjoy a delicious meal, that's the vagus nerve helping me chill out.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that we have this internal system that can really help us shift from that state of stress, and alertness to a state of calm and relaxation.
Well, this has been an incredible journey through the nervous system. I feel like I've learned so much. We've explored the brain, the spinal cord, the network of nerves throughout the body, and now these amazing cranial nerves.
It really is a testament to the complexity and the elegance of the human body. And, we've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to learn and discover about this amazing system.
I know. It makes you realize how much we take for granted. All these intricate processes are happening within us, every second without us even having to think about it.
And that's the beauty of it. The nervous system is this symphony of, coordinated activity, this complex network that governs everything we do, think, and feel.
It truly is awe-inspiring. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to marvel at the wonder of your own nervous system. It's the intricate network that makes you you.
And remember, even though we've reached the end of our deep dive, the journey of discovery never really ends. There's always more to learn, more connections to make, more to appreciate about this incredible system that connects us to the world around us.